Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text. Usually when we talk about treating an illness, we think about introducing something entirely new to the body, like you give an antibiotic to kill a bacteria.
Right. Or, a chemical to neutralize an acid.
Exactly. It's like an external solution to an internal problem. But when you step into the pharmacology of hematopoietic agents, that whole paradigm just totally flips.
It really does. You're not sending in outside troops anymore. You are basically acting as the site manager for the body's own internal manufacturing plant.
Yeah, we're pulling the levers on the bone marrow factory. And that's exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to this deep dive, which is specifically tailored for you nursing professionals who are mastering Chapter 59 of Lens Pharmacology.
We are looking at the exact drugs used to command this biological factory. How they bring patients back from the brink of kidney failure or chemotherapy destruction.
And critically, why overriding the body's natural limits comes with some incredibly dangerous side effects.
It's a profound shift in patient care, honestly. We are using lab-made versions of naturally occurring hormones. They're called hematopoietic growth factors or colony-stimulating factors.
And they basically tell stem cells to multiply, right?
Exactly. But before we look at the first drug class, it's definitely worth addressing a major hurdle for anyone studying this material, and that is the nomenclature outlined early in the text.
Oh man, the naming conventions are just notorious. It feels like every single drug has like 3 different aliases.
I mean, they basically do. Every product in this category has a biologic name, a generic pharmacologic name, and usually multiple brand names.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. Take our first prototype drug, for example. The biologic name for the natural hormone is erythropoietin. But the generic pharmacologic name for the lab-made version is epoetin alfa.
Right.
And then the manufacturer brand names are Epogen, Procrit, or Retacrit.
So a physician might write an order for Epogen, but the pharmacy dispenses epoetin alfa, and your textbook is talking about the biologic class.
Yeah, and fluency in all 3 is an absolute requirement for safe medication administration. You have to know them all.
So keep those naming tables handy for sure. Let's look at the first cellular assembly line, which is the red blood cells, or erythrocytes. These are the oxygen haulers of the body.
And under normal conditions, the kidneys act as the floor managers for this line. They sense when blood oxygen drops, and they secrete natural erythropoietin,
which then travels to the bone marrow and signals it to, ramp up red blood cell production.
Right. But if a patient develops chronic kidney disease, or CKD, that floor manager goes missing.
The bone marrow is still perfectly capable of making red blood cells, right?
Completely capable.
Yeah.
But it never gets the hormonal signal to start, so the patient develops profound anemia.
And that's where the pharmacological solution comes in, which is epoetin alfa. It's an erythropoiesis-stimulating agent, or ESA.
Through recombinant DNA technology, we basically administer a glycoprotein that is virtually identical to the human hormone. We're artificially replacing that missing signal.
But setting the signal is really only step 1. I like to think of epoetin alfa like hiring a massive crew of extra construction workers to build a brick wall.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, because you can hire 100 workers, but if you don't actually supply them with any bricks or mortar, they're just going to stand around on the job site doing nothing. The bone marrow works the exact same way.
It does. The necessary bricks and mortar in this scenario are iron, folic acid, and vitamin B12.
They need those to actually build the cells.
Exactly. Red blood cells require these foundational elements for DNA synthesis and hemoglobin structure. If a patient is deficient in any of these, the response to epoetin alfa will be minimal.
So the immediate nursing implication here is that you cannot just blindly administer this injection.
Definitely not. You must verify the patient's iron stores prior to administration.
What are the specific labs we're looking at?
The clinical benchmarks to monitor are a transferrin saturation of at least 20% and a ferritin concentration of at least 100 nanograms per milliliter.
Okay, so transferrin tells you how much iron is currently being transported, right?
Yes, and ferritin measures the body's deep tissue iron reserves. If those numbers are low, the patient needs iron supplementation before you introduce the ESA. Otherwise, you're just wasting a vital medication.
Makes total sense. Now, beyond chronic kidney disease, there are a few other major indications for epoetin alfa. It's heavily used for chemotherapy-induced anemia in patients with non-myeloid malignancies.
And that is a very important distinction we'll definitely come back to.
We also see it used for HIV-infected patients taking zidovudine, which is notorious for causing severe anemia. And for preoperative patients facing major elective surgeries where blood loss is expected.
Taking a step back, though, the introduction of ESAs fundamentally changed hematology. Before these existed, the main way to treat severe anemia in dialysis or oncology was just through regular blood transfusions.
Which comes with a whole host of risks.
Right. Viral transmission, transfusion reactions. Epoetin alfa allows patients to avoid all that while keeping a more stable baseline.
But it has a relatively short half-life, right? 18 to 24 hours. So patients are tethered to frequent needle sticks, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week.
Yes, and to solve that compliance issue, biochemists actually modified the molecule. They created darbepoetin alfa.
So if epoetin alfa works so well, why do we need darbepoetin? How is it different?
Well, it's structurally similar, but it has a critical modification. They added 2 extra carbohydrate chains.
Okay, and what do those chains do?
They create what's called steric hindrance. They physically increase the size of the molecule, which basically acts as a physiological anchor.
Oh, so it slows down how fast the enzymes can degrade it.
Exactly. And it slows down how quickly the kidneys can clear it. Because of those 2 extra chains, the half-life jumps to an impressive 49 hours.
Wow, so that translates to an injection only once a week. That's a huge reduction in burden for the patient.
It is. But all that pharmacological power comes with a severe cost. Stimulating the bone marrow sounds like a medical miracle, but the clinical reality is far more complex.
Yeah, post-marketing surveillance over the last 2 decades has revealed some intense risks. There's been a sharp decline in the widespread use of ESAs because of it.
The safety alerts surrounding this drug class are extensive. ESAs actually carry black box warnings for severe cardiovascular events.
That's intense.
Administering these drugs significantly increases the risk of stroke, heart failure, myocardial infarction, and cardiac arrest.
Wait, I'm stuck on this point. Physiology teaches us that a normal, healthy hemoglobin level is generally somewhere between 12 and 16 grams per deciliter, right?
Right, depending on gender.
But the safety guidelines state we are putting the patient at massive risk if we drive their hemoglobin above 11. Why are we deliberately keeping our patients slightly anemic?
It's a great question. It comes down to fluid dynamics and peripheral resistance.
Okay, break that down for me.
When you rapidly increase the hematocrit, the total volume of red blood cells, you are fundamentally altering the viscosity of the blood. You're making it thicker. Pumping a viscous, thick fluid through the vascular system requires exponentially more force from the heart. That sharply drives up systemic blood pressure.
So about 30% of dialysis patients actually need their blood pressure meds adjusted once they start ESAs.
Yes. So thick blood under high pressure creates the perfect environment for a clot to lodge in a vessel. That triggers a stroke or a heart attack.
So how do we prevent that clinically?
The guidelines give us 2 specific red flags. The cardiovascular risk skyrockets if the absolute hemoglobin level exceeds 11 or if it rises too rapidly.
What's considered too rapidly?
Faster than 1 gram per deciliter in a 2-week window. The therapeutic goal is never to return the patient to a physiological normal.
The objective is just to use the absolute lowest dose needed to avoid a blood transfusion.
Exactly. It's a massive shift in how we view lab values. We are managing a controlled state of disease rather than aiming for perfect health.
And that cautious approach definitely extends to the oncology setting, too.
Yeah.
Because there's a profound warning in the text regarding tumor progression.
Yes. ESAs have been shown to accelerate tumor progression and shorten overall survival in certain cancer patients.
How exactly does an anemia drug feed a tumor, though?
Well, solid tumors rely heavily on angiogenesis building their own blood vessel networks to get oxygen and nutrients. A low oxygen environment actually limits a tumor's growth rate.
So if you artificially flood the patient's system with fresh, oxygen-rich red blood cells,
you are delivering premium physiological fuel right to the tumor's doorstep. You accelerate its metabolism and growth.
Which means, it makes absolutely zero sense to administer an ESA to a patient who actually has a chance of beating their cancer.
Right. In oncology, ESAs are strictly indicated for palliation. If the goal of the chemo is curative, ESAs are entirely contraindicated.
Translating all of this to practical bedside nursing, the handling and administration of these drugs requires real meticulous care.
It really does. Epoetin alfa is a fragile glycoprotein.
Yeah, it's stored in the fridge, right?
Yeah.
Not the freezer. And you must never shake the vial.
Never shake it. Shaking the vial can physically denature the protein. The mechanical stress causes the complex folded molecule to basically unwind, making it useless.
So if you need to mix it, you just roll the vial gently between your palms.
Yes. It can be given subcutaneously or intravenously. And due to those cardiovascular risks, nurses must monitor complete blood counts twice weekly.
We also have to mention a terrifying, though rare, adverse effect called pure red cell aplasia, or PRCA.
PRCA is a stark reminder of how unpredictable the immune system can be. In very rare instances, the patient's immune system identifies the synthetic epoetin alfa as a foreign pathogen.
And it produces neutralizing antibodies against it.
Right. But the tragedy is that these antibodies are cross-reactive. They don't just neutralize the drug, they attack and destroy the native erythropoietin produced by the patient's own kidneys.
So red blood cell production just halts entirely.
Completely, leaving the patient permanently dependent on blood transfusions for survival.
Wow. It's biological hacking, and it is never without risk. Before we leave red blood cells, there's a fascinating detail regarding older adults in the text.
Oh, about mortality.
Yeah. Administering ESAs to the elderly doesn't actually lower their overall mortality rate, but it significantly improves their quality of life by alleviating the crushing fatigue of chronic anemia.
It reinforces that clinical care isn't just about extending life, but preserving the dignity and energy of the days a patient has left.
Absolutely. But fixing the oxygen supply is only half the battle, especially for a patient undergoing aggressive chemotherapy.
Right, because the more immediate threat to their life is often systemic infection. The chemotherapy has decimated their white blood cells.
That brings us to section 3, the leukopoietic growth factors. We need to stimulate the production of granulocytes to protect the patient.
The prototype drug here is filgrastim, also known as GCSF, or granulocyte colony stimulating factor.
While epoetin acts on the red blood cells, filgrastim targets the bone marrow to stimulate the production of mature neutrophils.
And it doesn't just increase their numbers. Filgrastim actually enhances their phagocytic activity, making those circulating neutrophils more aggressive at destroying bacteria.
We use filgrastim for post-chemotherapy recovery, following bone marrow transplants, and for treating severe chronic neutropenia.
It's administered via IV or sub-Q injection. But there is a strict, non-negotiable timing rule.
Right, I remember this. Filgrastim must be started 24 hours after the chemotherapy infusion has concluded.
Not during and not before.
Why is the timing so rigid?
It's rooted in how chemotherapy functions. Most cytotoxic chemo agents target rapidly dividing cells.
Okay.
If you give filgrastim concurrently with chemo, you are hormonally commanding the bone marrow to rapidly divide at the exact moment the chemo agent is hunting for rapidly dividing cells to destroy.
Oh, so you'd just be forcing the bone marrow to produce new white blood cells simply to be slaughtered by the chemotherapy.
Exactly. It defeats the entire purpose.
The main side effect patients report with filgrastim is deep bone pain. It affects roughly a quarter of all patients.
It makes sense when you think about the mechanism. You are taking a confined, rigid space, the medullary cavity inside the bone, and commanding the cells inside to expand at 500% their normal capacity.
So that massive cellular proliferation literally creates intense physical pressure inside the bone itself, like it's rattling the walls.
The pain is deeply uncomfortable, and it's directly dose-dependent. Nurses usually manage this by starting with non-opioid analgesics, like acetaminophen.
The other major physiological risk here is leukocytosis. Basically, the bone marrow overshoots the target.
Right. In about 2% of patients, the drug causes the total white blood cell count to spike past 100,000 per cubic millimeter.
Which means nurses have to monitor complete blood counts twice weekly with filgrastim, just like with ESAs.
Yes. If the absolute neutrophil count exceeds 10,000, the protocol is to decrease the dose or discontinue the therapy.
Alongside standard filgrastim, the textbook introduces a modified version called peg-filgrastim. What exactly does the process of pegylation achieve?
Pegylation involves attaching a compound called polyethylene glycol, or PEG, to the base molecule.
And that chemical modification drastically increases the physical mass of the drug, right?
Yes. The PEG creates this hydrophilic cloud around the protein. It shields it from enzymatic degradation and makes it far too large for the kidneys to easily filter out.
So by bulking up the molecule, it just stays trapped in the systemic circulation for much longer.
The half-life stretches from a mere 3.5 hours for native filgrastim all the way up to 17 hours for pegfilgrastim.
That's a massive difference.
It really is. Instead of daily injections for up to 2 weeks, an oncology patient only requires a single dose of pegfilgrastim per chemo cycle.
That is a profound advancement in patient comfort. Now, there's one more leukopoietic drug we need to cover. Sargramostim, known as GM-CSF. What does the M stand for?
The M stands for macrophage. Sargramostim has a broader spectrum of action.
So while filgrastim is highly targeted toward neutrophils, sargramostim stimulates neutrophils, but also calls up monocytes, macrophages, and eosinophils.
It initiates a much wider immune system mobilization. Because of that, its clinical indications are more specialized. We see it used primarily for failing bone marrow transplants or to accelerate recovery in older patients with acute myelogenous leukemia.
Okay, so we've rebuilt the oxygen haulers, and we've mobilized the immune system soldiers. The final cellular line from Chapter 59 is the platelets.
The construction crew responsible for patching vascular damage. Platelets are the foundation of hemostasis and clotting.
And the pharmacological agents targeting this line are the thrombopoietin receptor agonists, or TRAs.
The prototype here is romoplastim, which is marketed as Nplate. Its primary clinical indication is for idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, or ITP.
Specifically when traditional treatments fail. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Earlier in nursing school, we learned ITP is an autoimmune issue where the body destroys its own platelets.
Mostly in the spleen, yes.
So we typically give steroids to suppress the immune system or remove the spleen. But romoplastim doesn't stop the destruction at all, right?
Exactly. It utilizes an entirely different mechanism. It's a unique molecular construct known as a peptibody.
A peptibody.
Yeah, it's a synthetic fusion of a peptide and an antibody structure. It mimics the natural hormone thrombopoietin. It bypasses the immune system entirely, travels straight to the bone marrow, and binds to megakaryocytes.
And those are the massive precursor cells that fragment themselves to create platelets.
Right. Romoplastim just forces these megakaryocytes into overdrive.
So instead of trying to stop the immune system from destroying the platelets, the drug simply forces the bone marrow to outproduce the destruction.
It's basically a brute force biological workaround. It's highly effective, but overriding the body's natural limits like this carries significant risks.
What are the adverse effects?
Common ones include arthralgia, dizziness, and localized pain. But overstimulating the megakaryocytes can actually lead to bone marrow fibrosis, where the marrow becomes congested with scar tissue.
And I imagine aggressively driving up platelet numbers creates a massive risk for blood clots.
Absolutely. If you manufacture an excess of platelets, they're going to do exactly what they were designed to do, form clots.
Which dictates the nursing care. It's administered subcutaneously, and the medication must be protected from light.
And nurses must track platelet counts with extreme precision. The therapeutic goal in ITP is not to return the patient to a normal platelet count.
It's the exact same philosophy as managing hemoglobin with ESAs, isn't it?
Yes. The target is the lowest effective dose to maintain a platelet count of approximately 50,000 per cubic millimeter.
That's just enough to prevent spontaneous hemorrhage. Pushing it any higher exponentially increases the risk of a pulmonary embolism.
Synthesizing the pharmacology of Chapter 59, the overarching theme is really the delicate balance of biological manipulation.
These hematopoietic agents are medical miracles. They allow us to rebuild a patient's blood profile and survive high-dose chemotherapy. But that power requires precise clinical boundaries.
There is a critical safety thread woven throughout this entire chapter. Because these agents actively stimulate cellular proliferation, they must be used with extreme caution and are often entirely contraindicated in patients with myeloid malignancies.
Right. If a patient has a cancer that originates in the bone marrow, and you administer a drug that commands the bone marrow to rapidly grow,
you're pouring gasoline directly onto a fire. You risk stimulating the cancer itself to proliferate faster.
That is terrifying.
It is. I want to leave you with a thought to mull over as you study these pathways. Think about the sheer audacity of recombinant DNA technology.
It's incredible.
We are injecting laboratory-engineered proteins to bypass failing kidneys, outpace autoimmune destruction, and force the bone marrow into hyperdrive. But the body's natural physiological limits exist for a reason.
Yeah, as we saw with the cardiovascular risks of ESAs or the bone pain from filgrastim.
When we artificially override those limits, we have to be fully prepared to manage the systemic consequences.
Managing that balance is the profound responsibility of the nurse at the bedside. You aren't just administering an injection. You are managing the throttle of a vastly complex biological engine.
Well said.
From all of us here at The Deep Dive, and a special shout out to the last-minute lecture team for our nursing students tuning in, thank you for exploring this fascinating pharmacology with us. Tough to look on your exams, you've got this.